The party wasn't supposed to be my escape. It was Rachel's birthday, my college roommate, who still lived like we were 25. I'd driven 2 hours to get there, telling Michael the first needed a girls' night. What I didn't tell him was that I'd packed a bag. What I didn't tell him was that I'd been planning this for weeks. The bourbon was my third. I don't usually drink bourbon too harsh, too honest. But that night, I needed something that burned. You've been staring at me for 12 minutes, married woman. Her voice was smoke and sin, and when I turned, she was leaning against the bar like she owned it. Dark hair that looked like she'd run her fingers through it, eyes that held secrets I wanted to learn. She wore confidence like expensive perfume, subtle, but impossible to ignore. I wasn't. The lie died on my tongue because she was right. I had been staring at the way she moved through the crowd like water, at how other women looked at her with want and men with envy. Liar. She plucked the olive from my drink, and I watched her lips close around it, watched her tongue dart out to catch a drop of brine. It was obscene in the most casual way possible. My phone buzzed. Michael, miss you. I almost laughed. Because sitting there, watching this stranger eat my olive like it was foreplay, I realized I didn't miss him. I missed the version of myself that existed before I became his wife, before I learned to make myself smaller to fit into his life. Under the table, her foot found my ankle. A slow drag up my calf that made my breath catch. She was wearing boots leather, worn soft, the kind that suggested she walked through life taking what she wanted. I'm Ava, she said, and the name fit her like those boots. I'm married, she finished. I know, the question is happily? The question hung between us like smoke. I should have said yes. Should have stood up, gone home, kissed my husband hello, and pretended this heat in my chest was just the bourbon. Instead I said, define happy. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Happy women don't come to parties alone and drink bourbon like it's medicine. She was right. I'd been medicating myself for months, with work, with wine, with the fiction that a good marriage was supposed to feel like comfortable silence. But comfortable had started to feel like suffocating. What if I told you I haven't felt truly alive in 3 years? The words spilled out before I could stop them, bourbon brave and dangerous. I'd say that's a shame. She leaned closer, and I caught her scent, something expensive and warm that made me want to bury my face in her neck. Because you're the most alive thing in this room. The party swirled around us, but we existed in a bubble of tension so thick I could taste it. Every nerve ending was awake, every breath deliberate. This was what I'd forgotten, this electrical current between two people who recognized something hungry in each other. Dance with me, she said, and it wasn't a request. On the makeshift dance floor, she pulled me closer than appropriate, closer than I'd been to anyone in months. The music was too loud, the bass thrumming through my chest, but all I could focus on was the way her hand rested on the small of my back, the way her thumb traced small circles through my dress. Your husband know you dance like this? She murmured against my ear. We don't dance. The admission was more intimate than I'd intended. Pity. Her lips brushed my earlobe, and I felt it in my toes. You move like you were born for it. I was born for a lot of things, I wanted to say, but I'd buried them under expectations and responsibilities until I'd forgotten they existed. The song changed to something slower, more dangerous. She turned me so my back was against her front, her hands on my hips, guiding me in a way that was definitely not appropriate for public. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt like myself, not someone's wife, not someone's employee, just a woman who wanted and was wanted in return. I should go, I whispered, but my body betrayed me, pressing back into her warmth. Should is a terrible word, she said. It's killed more dreams than fear ever has. The bathroom was a mistake. I knew at the moment. I followed her down the narrow hallway, past couples making out against the walls, past the point of no return. The neon light flickered, casting everything in shades of sin and shadow. She cornered me against the sink, one hand braced by my head, the other tracing the line of my collarbone. In the mirror, I could see us, her dark hair falling like a curtain, my face flushed and wanting. Tell me to stop, she said, and her voice was rough with the same desire I felt pooling low in my belly. We shouldn't. But even as I said it, my hands were fisting in her shirt, pulling her closer. Not what I asked. Her teeth grazed my neck and I gasped. I asked you to tell me to stop. The words wouldn't come. Couldn't come. Because stopping was the last thing I wanted, even though I knew it was what I should want. I hate how much I want you, I whispered, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in months. Good, she said, and her smile was wicked. Hate keeps things interesting. Her mouth was on my throat, finding the spot that made me arch against her. I caught sight of our reflection, my lipstick smeared, my hair mussed, my eyes dark with want. I looked like a woman having an affair, and the realization should have stopped me cold. Instead, it made me hungry for more. Come home with me, she said, and it wasn't a question. I can't, you can. Her thumb traced my lower lip, and I fought the urge to bite it. The question is, will you? My phone buzzed again. Michael, probably wondering why I wasn't responding. The responsible part of me, the part that had been trained to be a good wife, screamed at me to answer it, to go home, to pretend this hadn't happened. But the woman I'd been before marriage, before compromise, before I'd learned to apologize for taking up space, she was clawing her way to the surface. One night, I said, and the words tasted like freedom. The taxi ride was torture. She sat close enough that I could feel the heat of her thigh against mine, far enough that I couldn't touch her without making it obvious. The city blurred past the windows, neon and shadow, possibility and regret. What's your name? She asked, and I realized I'd never told her. Does it matter? It does to me. Sarah. It felt strange on my tongue, like I was introducing a stranger, Sarah. She said it like she was tasting it, and somehow it sounded different coming from her. Not the name my mother had given me, not the name on my marriage license, but something entirely new. Her apartment was everything mine wasn't: bold colors, expensive furniture, books stacked on every surface. It looked like a place where someone actually lived, not just existed. Wine, she asked, but we both knew we were past the point of pretense. I don't think wine is what either of us wants right now. She smiled, and it was predatory in the best way. What do you want, Sarah? The question hung between us like a challenge. What did I want? I wanted to feel alive. I wanted to remember what it was like to be desired, not just needed. I wanted to be someone other than the woman who made grocery lists and remembered anniversaries. I want to forget, I said finally. Forget what? Everything. My name, my life, the woman I'm supposed to be. She moved closer, and I could smell her perfume, could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. I can help with that. Her bedroom was a sanctuary of silk and shadow. She lit candles instead of turning on the lights, and the flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls. It felt like entering another world, one where consequences didn't exist and guilt was just a word. Second thoughts? She asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that I hadn't heard before. No, I was surprised by how certain I sounded. No second thoughts. She approached me slowly, like I was something wild that might bolt. Her hands found the zipper of my dress, and she pulled it down with deliberate slowness, her fingers trailing along my spine. "Pretty underwear for your husband?" she asked, and there was an edge to her voice. "I bought them today." The admission hung between us, heavy with implication. Her expression shifted, realization dawning. You planned this. Not this exactly, but something. I've been dying slowly for months, and I couldn't do it anymore. She kissed me then, and it wasn't gentle. It was hungry, desperate, the kind of kiss that left marks. She kissed me like she was trying to consume me, like she could taste my loneliness and wanted to devour it. We fell onto the bed in a tangle of limbs and want. She knew exactly how to touch me, how to make me arch and gasp and forget everything. But the sensation of her hands on my skin, she kissed me like I was precious and fucked me like I was hers, and for those hours, I was. I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted like this, not just needed for what I could provide, but desired for who I was in my bones. She touched me like she was mapping new territory, like every gasp and moan was a victory. "Look at me," she whispered when I tried to close my eyes, tried to lose myself in the darkness. "I want to see you." So I looked, and in her eyes, I saw myself reflected, not as someone's wife or someone's employee, but as a woman who was beautiful and powerful, and worthy of being desired. When it was over, we lay tangled in the sheets, my head on her chest, listening to her heartbeat slow. The candles had burned low, and the room was filled with the scent of sex and satisfaction. "Tell me about your marriage," she said, and I tensed. Why? Because I want to understand what I'm competing with. I laughed, but it came out bitter. "You're not competing with anything. You're competing with a ghost." "What do you mean?" "I mean I loved him once. The man I married. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being lovers and started being roommates. We have dinner conversations about the weather and grocery lists. We have sex on birthdays and anniversaries, and it's fine. It's always fine. Fine is the enemy of extraordinary. I know. I just forgot that for a while." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "Are you going to stay with him?" The question I'd been avoiding all night. The one that would determine whether this was a mistake or a beginning. "I don't know," I said, and it was the truth. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then I saw her Ava standing by the window in nothing but a silk robe, her dark hair catching the light. My phone was buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. 17 missed calls from Michael, 12. Text messages ranging from concern to panic. Popular woman, Ava said, not turning around. He's worried. He should be. I sat up, pulling the sheet around me, and looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room. My hair was wild, my lips swollen, my neck marked with evidence of the night before. I looked like a woman who'd been thoroughly fucked, and the realization sent a thrill through me that I didn't want to examine too closely. I should go, I said, but I made no move to get up. Should again. She turned, and her expression was unreadable. Will you go back to him? I picked up my wedding ring from the nightstand, where I'd placed it before she'd undressed me. It felt heavier than it had before, like it was made of lead instead of gold. I slipped it on, then found myself spinning it around my finger, a nervous habit I'd developed over the years. I don't know, I said again, and this time it felt like the most important truth I'd ever spoken. She moved toward me, settling on the edge of the bed. Her hand covered mine, stilling the nervous spinning of my ring. I'm not going to ask you to leave him, she said. But I'm also not going to pretend this didn't happen. What does that mean? It means I'll be here if you need me. It means I understand that some awakenings take time. She kissed me then, and it was different from the night before. This kiss was a promise, a question, a dare. It tasted like coffee and possibility. I have to go, I said when we broke apart. I know. I dressed slowly, aware of her eyes on me. When I was fully clothed, I felt like I was putting on a costume, the outfit of a woman who had never spent the night in a stranger's bed, who had never felt this alive. At the door, she caught my hand. Sarah? Yeah? Next Thursday, Rachel's having another party. I know. Will you be there? I looked at her, really looked. At her tousled hair and knowing smile. At the way she wore her own skin like armor. At the woman who had reminded me that I was more than just a wife, more than just a role to be played. I don't know, I said, but we both knew it was a lie. The drive home was a blur of highway and regret and anticipation. I kept the windows down, letting the wind whip through my hair, trying to carry away the scent of her perfume that still clung to my clothes. Michael was waiting when I walked through the door. He looked tired, worried, older than his 32 years. Where were you? He asked, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Fear, maybe, or recognition. I told you. Rachel's party. You didn't answer your phone. I was drunk. I crashed on her couch. The lie came easily, and I hated myself for how natural it felt. But I also hated him for not knowing me well enough to see through it. I was worried, he said, and he reached for me. I let him hold me, let him bury his face in my hair. But when he kissed me, it felt like betrayal, not of him, but of the woman I'd been just hours before. I missed you, he said. I know. But I didn't miss him, not the way I should have. Not the way I'd expected to after a night away. Instead, I felt like I was acting in a play I'd forgotten the lines to. The next week passed in a haze of normalcy. I made dinner, did laundry, smiled. At the right moments. But underneath it all, I was counting down to Thursday. To the possibility of seeing her again, of remembering what it felt like to be fully alive. Michael didn't notice the change in me, and that was almost worse than if he had. It meant we'd grown so far apart that even a fundamental shift in who I was didn't register on his radar. On Wednesday night, he asked what I was doing the next evening. "Rachel's having people over again," I said, and it wasn't even a lie. "Again? Didn't you just see her? It's been a week." "Seems like a lot of parties." I shrugged, not trusting myself to speak, because the truth was I would have driven to 100 parties if it meant seeing her again. Thursday came like a fever dream. I spent the day in a state of nervous energy, changing clothes 3 times, applying and reapplying lipstick. I told myself I was just going to a party, that I didn't even know if she'd be there. But when I walked into Rachel's apartment, I felt her presence immediately. She was sitting in the same spot at the bar, wearing a different dress but the same confidence. Our eyes met across the room, and I felt that familiar electricity arc between us. "You came," she said when I approached. I said I might. "No, you said you didn't know." "But you knew." She was right. I'd known since the moment I'd left her apartment that I'd be back. The question was, what happened next? "Buy me a drink?" I asked. "Depends. What are you drinking tonight?" "Something that burns." She smiled, and it was like coming home to a place I'd never been. "I think I can help with that." We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told me about her job, something in marketing that sounded both boring and glamorous. I told her about mine teaching high school English, which sounded noble but felt like slow death most days. "Why teaching?" she asked. "I used to love books, stories, the way they could transport you to somewhere else entirely." "Used to? I don't read much anymore." "No time. That's not true." "What? You have the same 24 hours everyone else does. You just choose to spend them differently." It was such a simple observation, but it hit me like a physical blow. She was right. I'd been using time as an excuse when the truth was I'd stopped making space for the things that fed my soul. "Dance with me," she said, and again, it wasn't a request. This time, I didn't hesitate. I followed her to the dance floor, let her pull me close, let myself remember what it felt like to be wanted. "I've been thinking about you," she said against my ear. "Just thinking?" "Among other things." The song was slower this time, more intimate. We moved together like we'd been doing it for years, like our bodies had memorized each other's rhythm. "Come home with me," she said. "I can't keep doing this." "Why not?" "Because I'm married. You were married last week too." "It's different now." "How?" "Because now I know what I'm missing." She pulled back to look at me, and her expression was serious. "What are you missing, Sarah?" "Everything. Passion, desire, the feeling that I matter as more than just a function." "You do matter. Not to him. Not anymore. Then why are you going back?" It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that kept me awake at night. Why was I going back to a marriage that felt like a beautifully decorated prison? "Because I don't know how to do anything else," I said, and it was the most honest answer I'd ever given. "That's not true either, isn't it?" She took my hand, led me off the dance floor to a quieter corner. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you're afraid." "Of what?" "Of being happy. Of taking up space. of admitting that you deserve more than fine. Her words hit me like a slap, mostly because they were true. I was afraid. I'd been afraid for so long that I'd forgotten what courage felt like. What if I leave him and regret it? I asked. What if you don't leave him and regret that instead? We stared at each other in the dim light, and I could see my future splitting into two paths, one that led back to the safe, suffocating comfort of my marriage, and one that led into the unknown with this woman who made me feel like I was on fire. I need time, I said. I know. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be who everyone else needs me to be. I know that too. And I need to know that this is about more than just the sex. She smiled, and it was softer than I'd ever seen it. Sarah, the sex is incredible, but it's not why I'm here. Why are you here? Because when I look at you, I see someone who's been sleepwalking through her life, and I want to be here when you wake up. I didn't go home with her that night. Instead, I drove around for hours, through neighborhoods I'd never seen, past lives I'd never lived. I found myself at the beach, sitting on the sand in my party dress, watching the waves crash against the shore. My phone rang. Michael, where are you? He asked. I needed some air. It's 2 a.m. I know. Are you coming home? The question hung between us, loaded with more weight than he probably realized. Because it wasn't just about tonight. It was about whether I was coming home to the life we'd built together, or whether I was finally brave enough to admit that sometimes love isn't enough. I don't know, I said, and for the first time I meant it. Sarah, what's going on? You've been different lately. Different. Not better or worse, just different. As if being myself was somehow a deviation from who I was supposed to be. I'm trying to figure that out. We can figure it out together. Can we? When's the last time? You asked me what I wanted, Michael. Not what I needed, not what would be practical or responsible, but what I actually wanted. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I don't know, he said finally. Neither do I, and that's the problem. I hung up and sat in the darkness, listening to the waves. The ocean was vast and wild and completely indifferent to my problems, and somehow that was comforting. My phone buzzed with a text from Ava. Thinking of you. 3 simple words, but they carried more weight than all of Michael's worried questions. Because she was thinking of me, not the version of me that cooked his dinner or did his laundry, but the me that existed in the spaces between expectations. I texted back, thinking of you too. Are you okay? I'm sitting on the beach at 2 a.m. having an existential crisis. You tell me. Want company? The offer was tempting. More than tempting. But I needed to sit with this feeling, this moment, of standing at the crossroads of my life. Not tonight. But thank you. For what? For seeing May stayed on the beach until sunrise, watching the sky change from black to deep purple to soft pink. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, and I realized it had been months since I'd taken the time to watch a sunrise. When I finally drove home, Michael was asleep on the couch, still in his clothes from the night before. He looked younger in sleep, like the man I'd fallen in love with in college. But looking at him now, I felt nothing but a profound sadness for what we'd lost. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. These hands had worn a wedding ring for 3 years, had signed lease agreements and tax returns and anniversary cards. But they'd also touched another woman's skin, had discovered what it felt like to be desired rather than just needed. Michael found me there an hour later, and he looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. "We need to talk," he said. "I know." "Are you having an affair?" The question was so direct, so unlike him, that I almost laughed. Would it matter if I was? Of course it would matter. "Why?" "Because you're my wife. Is that all I am to you? A title?" He sat across from me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "No, you're everything." "Then why don't you know me anymore?" "I do know you. What's my favorite book?" "I what?" "My favorite book, what is it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know." "It's The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Has been since college. You gave it to me for our first anniversary. I remember. Do you remember why it's my favorite?" "No." "Because it's about a woman who refuses to be diminished by marriage, who chooses herself, even when it costs her everything." The words hung between us like a verdict. He didn't need to ask what I was trying to tell him. He could see it in my face, in the way I sat with my shoulders back for the first time in months. "So what now?" he asked. "Now I choose myself." The divorce was as amicable as these things can be. We split our possessions like we were dividing up a life that had belonged to strangers. He kept the house, I kept the car. We both kept our wounds. I moved into a small apartment across town, one with big windows and room for all the books I'd stopped reading. I quit my teaching job and started freelance writing, something I'd dreamed of doing but never had the courage to try. Ava and I took things slow. We went on actual dates, had real conversations, built something that was more than just attraction. She was right, the sex was incredible, but it wasn't why we were together. "Do you regret it?" she asked one night, as we lay tangled in her silk sheets. "Which part?" "Any of it?" "The marriage, the divorce, this." I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the years with Michael? The safe, comfortable life I'd built and then dismantled? The pain I'd caused him by choosing myself over us? "I regret that it took me so long to wake up," I said finally. "But I don't regret waking up, even if you'd never met me." "Even then?" "Because you didn't create this feeling in me, Ava. You just reminded me it was there." She kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Sarah. I love you too." And I did. Not the desperate, hungry love of our first night together, but something deeper. The love of being seen and accepted and challenged to be better. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we see what happens when I stop running from who I am. And who are you?" I smiled, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm still figuring that out. But I know I'm not the woman who sits in the corner drinking bourbon and wishing she were somewhere else. No, no, no. I'm the woman who takes what she wants and makes no apologies for it." I like that woman. So do I. That was 6 months ago. I still wear my hair a little wild, still drink bourbon when I want to taste something that burns. I published my first short story last month, and I'm working on a novel about a woman who discovers that the life she thought she wanted was just the life she thought she was supposed to want. Michael and I exchanged Christmas cards this year. He's dating someone new, a kindergarten teacher who probably makes better casseroles than I ever did. I'm happy for him, genuinely. We were never meant to be forever. We were just meant to be practice for the real thing. The real thing, as it turns out, is messier and more complicated and infinitely more satisfying than I ever imagined. Last week, Ava asked me to move in with her. I said yes without hesitation because I've learned that life is too short to spend it wondering, what if? But the real truth, the thing I've learned about myself in these months of becoming who I was, always meant to be, that woman who counted 12 minutes of being desired, who followed a stranger into a bathroom, who chose passion over security. She wasn't someone I became that night. She was someone I'd always been, buried under years of expectations and apologies and the belief that wanting more was somehow selfish. I wasn't split in two that morning after. I was made whole. And that's the story I tell myself now, when I catch my reflection in the mirror and see a woman who looks like she knows exactly who she is and where she's going. The woman she uncovered was me all along,